Joining us now from Amsterdam is Ott van Daalen. He's the founder and attorney with the law firm Digital Defense. Here in our Washington, D.C. studio is Cathy Sloan. She's the Vice President of Government Relations at the Computer and Communications Industry Association. From Hong Kong, we're joined by Joshua Steimle. He's the CEO of the digital marketing firm MWI and a contributor to Forbes magazine. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Cathy, let's start with you. What exactly is net neutrality?
So net neutrality is a little bit different depending on who you ask, but basically it's the principle that you can go anywhere you want on the global internet and avail yourself of the content and apps and services that you want, and there won't be any commercial interference or government interference with your choices.
Does that primarily mean that they will control the speed, or is this just total access that we're talking about?
This is access. This is well, most people understand it to be just access. We at CCIA actually use the term open internet, which is the same term that is used by the FCC to describe internet access that is in fact open. In Europe, the government refers to their regulations that they're proposing as net neutrality. But here in the US, the FCC and we actually say open internet rules.
Okay, let's go to Joshua in Hong Kong. Joshua, this is becoming a debate which is gathering a lot of steam here in the United States. Just want to look at it another way. In most free market societies, which the United States says it is, private companies are allowed to charge whatever they want to do whatever they want to with their products and services. Why should the government interfere in this particular service, the provision of internet?
Well, that's precisely my point, is that I'm against government interference in this market. And it's not the division that I see between proponents of net neutrality and opponents ultimately boils down to whether people trust the government or do not trust the government. Those who trust the government as an arbiter of what is fair in the business world, they tend to be proponents of net neutrality. Those who see the government as a source of interference and potentially corruption tend to be opposed to net neutrality.
Ott van Daalen, the Netherlands is one of 3 countries in Europe with net neutrality provisions already in place. How does it work in the Netherlands?
In the Netherlands, the principle is that you cannot discriminate or prioritize or charge extra traffic for extra prices for specific traffic unless you have good reasons to do so. And the idea is that when you do so when you, for example, prioritize email or, for example, prioritize YouTube videos over email, you need to do so because you actually have to increase access to a wider range of services for your users. So that's the idea.
Cathy, President Obama wants to make the provision of internet services or put it on the same basis as the provision of electricity or water or...
Not exactly.
Other kinds of...
Not exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, what... should it be regulated like utilities?
Not like a utility, no.
Yeah.
Utility, the word utility implies public ownership and public regulation of rates, terms and conditions, etc. So we think of our water and our electricity as regulated utilities. Once upon a time, with the AT&T monopoly, telephone was a regulated utility. We're not suggesting we should go back to that. Merely that because there's so little market for internet access, we heard from Josh that it's a market that is a business that shouldn't be regulated. Well, it's really a duopoly between cable and telephone here in the US. So all we want the FCC to do is make sure that those companies that control that last mile physical connection to your home or business cannot impose their own commercial preferences on what goes through that connection on the internet. So it's not really so much a utility as it is critical infrastructure that the government is not going to regulate the content either, but they are going to ensure that the duopoly controllers of that network can't mess with your choices.
Right. What do you make of that, Josh? That it's a duopoly here in the United States. The government needs to step in here and perhaps diversify the number of providers who are giving us this service.
I agree that the current situation is not the ideal, but if we look at the history of the telecoms and the ISPs, a lot of their entrenched position, their duopoly power, or a lot of people say monopoly power, is due to government regulation in the first place. My fear is that by increasing government regulation or giving the government any level of more control, it's only going to double down on the problems that we have. It's going to create more challenges down the road. I would prefer to see that we relax the regulations that are in place, open it up for more competition, which will drive down prices, will increase quality, and also then 10 years down the road, I don't think this is going to be an issue if we allow it to work itself out. I'm afraid if the government gets involved, we're going to have more problems 10 years down the road than we have today.
Art van Daalen, what is the situation in the Netherlands? Do you have, how many internet service providers do you have? Is there a wide range that people can choose from? Can they offer different kinds of services? Can they offer different kinds of speeds as well?
So I think it's somewhat comparable to the US of A in terms of that you have cable providers and you have telephony providers. But we have a very high broadband penetration in the Netherlands. Actually 90% is using broadband, so that's quite a good score. You have a wide range of possibilities of which kind of access you want to, if you want a higher speed, a lower speed, if you want capped rates or not. So in terms of fixed lines, I'd say there's a lot of competition. In terms of mobile lines, there's also some competition, so mobile telephony, mobile internet. We have three, four operators with their own networks. And a lot of operators doing their business on those networks. And net neutrality was introduced or was going into effect approximately 1 year ago now, and I think that the fears Joshua just pointed out actually are not taking place in reality. Things are going quite well. We don't see any interference by companies in web usage or app usage, and of course there are boundary issues like if you have an open Wi-Fi in a hotel, do you also have to adhere to net neutrality rules? But the principles are working out quite well.
Cathy, just to clarify the situation in the United States, what we have now is net neutrality, isn't it?
That's right, because it's still kind of legacy from the Title II telecommunications framework that we were living under throughout the 90s and up until 2005 when internet access became deregulated by the FCC. So whether you're talking about Yahoo or AOL or Google or Amazon, all those companies, eBay, they were all founded and began to thrive under a telecommunications framework where two-way connections without discrimination were the norm. That only changed in 2005, and the FCC put in place of that framework a policy statement for consumer rights and user rights on the internet. But that was then turned over, the court threw that out in the BitTorrent and Comcast case as not enforceable. They weren't enforceable rules. So then the FCC went to work on enforceable rules and came out in 2010 with its first set of actual open internet rules adopted after a full administrative rulemaking procedure with public comment and everything. But that was also thrown out by the court this past January in the Verizon case for lack of the FCC relying on the correct statutory framework.
Okay. Joshua, would you support the maintenance of the status quo here in the United States right now?
I think the status quo is better than implementing new regulations, but I'm not in favor of the status quo either. I think there are problems that need to be resolved, but I look towards free markets as a better way to regulate the market than the government regulating the market. I have concerns about privacy issues with the government getting more involved. I have concerns about competition issues. The government is a corporation. It's the largest monopoly in the world, the U.S. government, that is. Do we really want the largest monopoly in the world controlling or having any added control over this medium?
Well, lots more to talk about, but we are going to take a break right now. We'll continue our discussion about net neutrality after the break. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.